In 2014, we had 42 overdose deaths here in St. Joseph County. In 2015, we had 59. Because of those overdose deaths and the epidemic that we were faced with, and more specifically because of the deaths themselves, we as law enforcement officers here in St. Joseph County decided to form a task unit, the Drug Investigations Unit. In 2016, we had 58 overdose deaths. 2017, we had 57 overdose deaths. And last year, we had 52 overdose deaths. Now, the Drug Investigations Unit, their primary purpose was to investigate those overdose deaths. But that wasn't the only action that was occurring here in St. Joseph County. We were meeting with medical providers. We were meeting with those who treated individuals who had the addiction of drugs. The combination of what we have done here in St. Joseph County, I'm very pleased to announce that thus far this year, we have had 12 overdose deaths. Now, I need to put that in perspective. 2 years ago, there were 510 total deaths in St. Joseph County. The overdoses accounted for 12% of our deaths here in St. Joseph County in 2017. Last year, we had 621 deaths here in St. Joseph County. We had 52 overdose deaths. That was 8% of all deaths that occurred in St. Joseph County were a result of an overdose. This year, there have been a total of 502 deaths in St. Joseph County thus far. 12 of those were a result of overdose deaths. That's 2% of our deaths in St. Joseph County were a result of overdoses. We've also had a rash of violence in St. Joseph County. And as you know, our resources are somewhat limited here in St. Joseph County. And so we have collectively talked, and we have decided that as of January 1st of next year, January 1st of 2020, we are going to close the doors of the Drug Investigations Unit. Not because they were unsuccessful, but because we have to determine where are our best uses of our resources. And right now, because of the violence that we have had in our community, we want to take those resources that we've been utilizing in the Drug Investigations Unit and have those investigate the violence that is occurring in our community. Now, make no mistake, we're still going to investigate those overdose deaths, just as we are investigating the overdoses. But those investigations will now be conducted solely by the jurisdictions, by the South Bend Police Department, by the County Police Department, and by the Mishawaka Police Department, independent of each other, but still working together. We won't have a unit per se that will be investigating those cases, but those overdoses will still be investigated in the manner that St. Joseph County deserves, just as we've been doing for the last 5 years. The Drug Investigations Unit opened its doors in January of 2016. It became fully staffed toward the latter part of 2016. But that was a task force. That was a task force because of the epidemic. More importantly, that was a task force because we in St. Joseph County weren't quite sure how to deal with the overdoses that we have been having in our community. We still have the same number of overdoses that are occurring. People aren't dying the way they were before. A lot of that credit goes to our medical community. A lot of the credit goes to the take-backs, the pill boxes that we have throughout St. Joseph County. There are fewer drugs in our community today than there were 5 years ago. People are still overdosing. People are no longer dying in the manner that they were before. We wanted to make sure that there weren't any rumors going around, any reasons why, except for we need to reallocate our resources to ensure that our county is as safe as it can be. We have representatives from the Mishawaka Police Department, from the County Police Department, and the South Bend Police Department here to be able to let everyone know that those are as important as they were yesterday. Those are as important today. But the difference is that those resources now need to be allocated towards the violence that is occurring in our community. When we just had a separate unit, they'll still investigate them individually in the jurisdictions. I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything.
Just briefly to reiterate what the prosecutor said. So through mutual discussion and mutual agreement, we came to this decision. It wasn't overnight. This has been almost this entire year's process. So evaluating one overdose or one overdose death as they come each at a time, we still looked at our personnel and, quite frankly, the best bang for our buck. So through, again, mutual discussion and mutual agreement, we had come to this. Again, not overnight. This has been going on all year long that we discussed. And the prosecutor is absolutely right. Everything is a priority to us. And right now, we have an overwhelming amount of violence in our city, and we're going to concentrate those resources there. We are still not going to duck or go away from the overdoses and the overdose deaths that we've had. Officers still respond to those. We treat those almost quite similar to a homicide scene. So we collect evidence, we do everything that we possibly can, including search warrants, and we present those to the prosecutor and to the coroner should there be an overdose death. That is not going to change at all.
Anybody have any questions on the county or Mishawaka?
How many officers were a part of this?
Yeah, so there were 6 officers from the South Bend Police Department, 1 officer from the Mishawaka Police Department, and 1 officer from the county police, and then the commander of the unit from the prosecutor's office.
And so will they go back to their respective jurisdictions?
Correct.
How about the commander?
The commander, actually, we still have overdose deaths, and so we will still investigate those. So he will coordinate still in those investigations, working with the individual jurisdictions. And he also, frankly, is going to help us out with the violence we have in our community, but more towards the cases in which we have charged, and then ensuring that we are doing what we need to hold those who have been violent in our community accountable.
Was there a particular tipping point? I mean, obviously one act of violence is too many, but at what point this year did these discussions begin?
Oh, geez, probably in July when we started seeing that the numbers were nowhere near. And a lot of it has to do with, frankly, how drug dealers are talking to their clients. Before, drug dealers, they wanted to make a buck. That's pretty much all they did. They looked for their client, they sold them the drugs, and they went on their merry way. Because they now know that we're serious here in St. Joseph County, drug dealers are actually talking to their clients and saying, you got Narcan? Are you with somebody else? So that if somebody does overdose, they're going to be able to be revived. Now, don't get me wrong. We still have a drug problem in St. Joseph County. We have a drug problem, frankly, throughout the United States. The difference is that folks are taking seriously that these drugs kill. And so more and more people are having Narcan. Our first responders 5 years ago did not carry Narcan. Now they all carry it. Family members are carrying Narcan, those whose loved ones are with this epidemic and this scourge of drug addiction. People now are taking this seriously, and so just going after and trying to prosecute isn't the most effective way. We still will do that, but it's not the only way to be able to attack the drug issues that we have in our community.
Now the officers that are not going to be on this drug task force anymore, are they going to now be focused on the homicides and violent crimes in the community?
Well, we have a homicide unit that's not going to change. Our numbers of the homicides haven't changed. It's more of the other shootings that we have and the other violence in our community. It's my understanding that that will be a lot of what they do, but frankly, like any department, South Bend Police Department, Mishawaka Police Department, the County Police Department, they have a lot of different duties that those officers have to engage in. Violence is certainly a priority.
Are you seeing any other counties in the state doing the same thing you're doing?
As far as I know of, we were the only county in the state that actually had a unit only for overdose deaths. This is different than the homicide unit or the special victims unit, where the homicide unit's been around since 1993. There are homicides that continue, and while it may ebb and flow, the numbers stay relatively the same for homicides. For the overdose deaths, if the numbers go way down, then we have to look at anything else and say where we need to use our resources. So I can't say that any other county is going to do that, but that's frankly because I don't know of any other county that was doing it in the first place.
Do you believe that this unit kind of helped fix the issues that were coming as far as working with medical professionals and that thing in regards to Narcan, or could these numbers jump back up and you guys recreate this unit down the road?
Yeah, there's certainly a concern. Absolutely, the drug investigations unit coordinated with our medical community. I mean, we now have a rapid response team for medical providers who will go into different communities. Oaklawn has done, I think, a fantastic job of growing in their impact in our community, and the drug investigations unit worked with them. Because, I mean, this is twofold. One is the supplier of the drugs. If they are there to make a buck, we're prosecuting them both feet. If they are also themselves an addict, we're looking for those individuals to get treatment. Well, that's coming from Oaklawn, that's coming from our medical providers, that's coming from our doctors. So working together is the best way to do that. If we find that our overdoses are starting to go up because we haven't coordinated in the manner that we used to, then we're certainly going to reassess it, because nothing's more important than a person's life. You can recover from anything else except death. And so we want to make sure that we do everything we can to keep our community safe and to keep our people alive. If we think that we have gotten a good base so that it's no longer necessary for a task force, but if we find that those numbers starting to creep up, then we'll certainly reevaluate that and make that happen.
You mentioned working with the medical community. Now that this task force has been dissolved, will there still be avenues for law enforcement to work with the medical community?
Oh, yeah, I think those bonds that we have made in the last 4 years are very strong. They're not going away. We have learned to our detriment in the beginning that we can't work in silos, that we have to work together to be able to attack this issue. Because this issue is not just a law enforcement one. Frankly, that's a small portion of what the issue is. The issue is the reasons why people are taking those drugs in the first place, the supply that is available for individuals by people leaving drugs in your cabinet and then somebody getting those. The reasons why the opioids in particular are being prescribed in the first place, that has changed drastically by our medical community in recognizing what can be the long-term impact of just prescribing, giving them 60 pills. Instead of giving them 60 pills, you give a person 3 or 4 to be able to get over that immediate pain. I'm not a medical expert, so I don't want to speak for our medical community, but I've seen a huge change, and I really enjoy the working together to be able to go after this issue.
And then you mentioned if the numbers increase, you might reassess looking at reforming the unit. Is there a specific number there? Is it what you had last year, 52, 53?
No, I mean, you can't really go after a particular number, but it looks, we waited this long because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a blip. But this has been a pretty long term in which our numbers have stayed down. It's certainly not perfect, and one is bad, but law enforcement has limited resources, and I respect that. I would love to have the unit remain, but I also have to be realistic. And there's only so many taxes that folks want to pay to be able to supply those law enforcement officers to do all of the things we want them to do. And then we have to make assessments of where those resources go.
What would you say to people in the community who may be thinking, well, if it's working, why stop now?
Because I believe, one, it will continue to work. We've learned a great deal by having the Drug Investigations Unit and the manner in which they investigated cases. While I can't speak for Mishawaka, the county, and the South Bend Police Departments, my belief is that they will continue that type of investigative activity that the unit itself had. We're not abandoning it by any stretch. We're just reallocating those resources. We're going to continue with the same focus that we've had, just do it in a different way.
What did you say the numbers were in 2015?
I'm going to give you guys lists, but just so you know, 2015 there were 59 overdose deaths. 2016 there were 58. 2017, there were 57. In 2018, there were 52. Now, you may hear different numbers from the coroner, for example, because the coroner has a certain category that certain way they have to categorize an overdose death, for example. A DUI in which somebody dies in a fatal crash, they would consider that to be an overdose death. That was a drug that had a direct correlation between it. That's not how we're categorizing it. That is a DUI death. That is a whole different way of looking at it. Any time there is a case that is undetermined, or if it is suicide, there really wouldn't be a need for law enforcement to investigate those in the same way in which there would be a drug dealer who was supplying the drug and they accidentally overdosed. So we don't count that. Or if, and we had a few of these, if somebody ODs, for example, in LaPorte, and they're taken to our hospital and they die as a result of that, the coroner has to count those as an overdose death in St. Joseph County. We don't count that because that's not where the crime occurred. So we've looked at every overdose in St. Joseph County since 2015 and then analyzed where they came from and fitting the criteria of that. That's how we counted the numbers. But those are the numbers we have.
And are those in reference to opioid overdoses only?
Not just opioids, correct.
Okay.
All drugs, right.
And speaking about the increase in violence, a lot of times drugs can be linked to that as well,
They
correct?
can, right. So, oh yeah, it's not like it goes away. It's not like we're not investigating these. We're just doing it in a different manner. So where before it was, there was somewhat of a separation with the Drug Investigations Unit, that was their primary focus. Now, if there is an overdose death, that is one of the many things that the different jurisdictions will do in investigating. So they'll investigate those, they'll investigate the violence. There's a lot of times where there's a combination between the two. Those investigators who are doing those will certainly work with those. We're still going to prosecute those. We're still going to investigate those. There's still a crime to be able to supply drugs, especially when it causes the death of another person. We're just not going to have that task force any longer.